Hi there. Ooh. Hi there, I'm Tara Gadomski, the writer of the blog New Citizen of the Old Country, which is about my experiences and journey becoming a dual citizen of the US and Hungary through my family ancestry. Some of you are going through possibly the same journey or maybe just interested in this process. On the blog, I detailed in 10 blog posts the like actual specifics of going from knowing that I was eligible probably for Hungarian dual citizenship to actually going to the ceremony and getting it and getting my passport. It was really exciting and emotional and roller coaster journey. And it's detailed on the blog, and I thought since I have the YouTube channel, I'll speak some of the blog posts in case some people prefer to watch rather than read. So let me start here. I'll be posting a new one each day. This is part one. And again, you can read this on my blog, New Citizen of the Old Country, but here we go. This is how I went from a memory of the word Magyar to finding the documents that made me eligible for Hungarian citizenship via the Simplified Naturalization Procedure. It's my journey to Hungarian citizenship, part 1 of 10. Magyar. I've known that word since I was a little girl and heard my grandmother say it. I knew it meant people in the old country, but I didn't know it meant specifically Hungarian. You see, because borders in Central and Eastern Europe changed many times in the 20th century, the villages in which my ancestors were born have been part of many different countries. Though some of my great grandparents were born in the Kingdom of Hungary, by the time I was born in the 1970s, their villages were part of the Soviet Union, and then, in the 1990s, became part of Ukraine, and in between were part of Czechoslovakia, and for one day, an independent Carpatho-Ukraine. Confusing, yes, but not impossible to unravel, as I discovered with a lot of determination and some luck. Here's how I was able to find my great grandmother's Hungarian birth record, which was the key to gaining my citizenship. I hope this story can help you if you too are searching for your family's documents. The memory. I was lucky that two of my great grandparents lived well into childhood, so I knew them. They lived well into my childhood, so I knew them. Both were born somewhere in the old country. Where specifically they were born, I didn't know. But I knew that the old country was important. I remember my grandparents and people at church talking reverently about the old country. I was also partly raised in old country culture, celebrating holidays and keeping family traditions as they had for hundreds of years. Now, growing up in northeastern Pennsylvania, I wasn't alone. Many families that came here from the old country and still felt part of it. And of course, we heard stories of my ancestors traveling from the old country to the US. In particular, we often heard the story about my great grandmother Anna leaving her home with just one suitcase, traveling with a friend to the US to meet her brother who had come before her. Now, I knew Anna as an old woman, and I loved imagining her as a young woman taking such a big risk. I knew the broad stories of my ancestors by heart, but I just didn't have their exact details, or importantly, their paperwork. First steps. Around 2017, when I started searching for the documents I needed for my Hungarian citizenship, I turned first to people I knew. My father searched through his records and asked his cousins if they had any of my great-grandparents' old country paperwork. My sister and I searched through some boxes of papers and photos that my grandmother had neatly packed up before her death. The only thing we could turn up was a birth record for my great-grandfather, who was born in a town in Galicia, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but not specifically Hungarian. Now, this is a fascinating history of Galicia, and it's really worth reading about separately. But you see, chatting with my relatives did help me with the details, which later became important. I remembered and confirmed with relatives that my great grandmother Anna had entered the US via a port in Philadelphia, while while my great-grandfathers, both of them had come through Perth and Boy. My grandmother used to talk about this a lot. This info became important as a cross-reference point. At the same time that I was quizzing family members, I also started looking at online ancestry databases. Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.com were the most useful to me, but I was very careful when using these databases. I made sure to always look for documents on these sites rather than relying on information entered by users, which isn't always totally correct. I checked various possible spellings of my ancestors' names. I took care not to cross any of my ancestors' records with another person of the same name, though at one point I did go down a rabbit hole thinking I had found my great-grandmother's birth certificate, only to realize it was a woman by the same name in Buffalo, New York, hundreds of miles away. But most importantly, I didn't get discouraged. Yes, sometimes I spent hours searching only to find dead ends, but I carefully started tracking information and began to piece it together. Finding the original spelling of an ancestor's name can be a big challenge. As many of you know, names get changed on documents, they become Americanized, and it can be complicated. The other challenge is unraveling the names of Hungarian villages to find the birth records. Many villages have two names, a Hungarian name and a Ukrainian or Polish or Slovakian name, for example. So along with the ancestry databases, I looked to researchers who had compiled information about the old country online. Some of them that I used were the Hungarian Village Finder, Transcarpathia Research, the Jewish Gen Subcarpathia Research Division, Slovakia Genealogy Research Strategies, and carpathorusin.org. I also joined Facebook groups about Hungarian and Carpathian ancestry and culture, and in one of these groups I had a stroke of luck, or perhaps divine timing. It took about 5 months of research, from talking to relatives, searching online databases, Googling for advice, and deep diving into the comments in Facebook groups, to finally be about 95% sure I had the correct spelling, birth date, and birthplace for one of my ancestors from the old country. Anna Soyak. That's the one who I had heard speak the word Magyar decades ago. So how did I specifically get there? First of all, I compiled everything I could easily get, like my grandparents' U.S. birth certificates, which listed their parents' names. Now, these were the people who were born in the old country. This helped me narrow down the spellings of their name. I figured these records would be the most accurate, and indeed they were. Though my great-grandmother's last name was spelled incorrectly on so many documents, it was correct on my grandmother's birth certificate, even with the accent of Soyak. I spent hours and hours searching through databases, turning up many false leads, but finally, a ship manifesto and a U.S. immigration arrival card with Anna Soyak's name spelled slightly wrong, but every other detail in line with what I knew of her broad life story. In particular, that clue about her arriving in Philadelphia, her age, her father's name, and that she was going to Scranton, Pennsylvania to work as a maid, and that she would be joining her brother there. There was a lot of information on that arrival card. 3. Cross-referencing that arrival card, a ship manifesto, and a U.S. Census form with my great-grandmother's death certificate and my grandmother's birth certificate, I felt I had some certainty. But one question remained. Where could I find her birth record now after the borders had changed so much? Well, her arrival card listed her as being from Határoszag, Hungary. So I dove into the Hungarian Village Finder to confirm that town in what was Ung County. 4. To find out the present-day name and location of that village, I studied maps, like this one, which I'm linking here. But mostly I got lucky by Googling the heck out of Határoszag, Hungary, which is how I ended up here at the carpathorusin.org, the carpathorusin.org Guide to the Homeland, which clearly notes Határoszag is also known as Verkhovna Bystra in present-day Ukraine. I got lucky again. I found another document from the 1940s which listed my great-grandmother's birthplace as Verkhovna Bystra, Czechoslovakia, which Made no sense at first, but then made total sense when I realized it was the 1940s. And at that point, that was the point where that part of Hungary had become Czechoslovakia before it became the Soviet Union and Ukraine. Okay, it was all coming together here. A final stroke of luck introduced me to the right person to help me with the final step. In one of the Carpathian Culture Facebook groups, another member posted a glowing reference for somebody called Robert Kozoro, who's now become a friend. He's a researcher in Hungary who specializes in the area where my family came from. I reached out to him tentatively as I was worried about how much research into my great-grandmother would cost, considering he would need to go to Ukraine and search 100-year-old records. I was also worried, anything could have happened to these records. Would they even still exist? Robert quoted me a very fair price and got to work right away. Within a couple of weeks, he sent me a message. Quote, I've arrived back from Ukraine. I found the birth record of Anya Soyak in the Greek Catholic Church Register. I found her 4 siblings beside her. You can find the pictures with the records attached. And yes, like many times, like now, and many times during the journey, I cried. But it was less about this successful treasure hunt, but more about that moment of seeing my great-grandmother's birth record. To imagine this old lady that I knew as an infant, it was just mind-blowing and heart-expanding. As an aside, you'll know if you speak Hungarian, it listed next to her name, Lány, girl. And just imagining her as a little tiny girl was very, very emotional. So here I was. I was on my way to becoming a Hungarian citizen, but it took many, many more steps and about 5 more years, which I'll outline in the next blog posts and blog videos. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks.